I'm Luke White, a second-generation Jamaican-British property investor here in the UK, and you're listening to Property, Purpose and People, a podcast that is specifically and intentionally created and curated for the windrush generation and their descendants. Today, we're talking about ownership. In particular, what is the true cost of ownership? Whether you're a homeowner or renting, this episode is for you. We'll begin with the practical side of ownership, like what it means to legally own a property. And then for those who stick around, we'll shift to something a little, shall we say, extra? Because who gives you extra? Who? By the end of this episode, I hope you'll walk away with new insights, not just about property, but about your purpose, about people. So let's dive in. All four of my grandparents came to this country, the United Kingdom, in the golden era known as the Windrush generation, after a plea from the British government to help rebuild this country after the devastation of the Second World War. I'm going to keep mentioning this point throughout this podcast because it's very, very important to situate us in the story. You see, we are invested in this country because we were pivotal in rebuilding it. But listen, that's for another episode. All four grandparents came to this country in that generation. Both my parents were born in this country. Most of their siblings, my aunties and uncles, were born and raised in West Philadelphia. Were born and raised here in London. And most of their kids, and now kids, my beautiful cousins, were all born here too. Me? I was born in another galaxy, far, far away, dropped here as a baby from a faraway land known as Krypton. Four grandparents, two sides of the family, two different experiences with ownership. While both sides rented at first when they got to this country, one side used ownership as a way to build wealth and then sell up and return to Jamaica after just 15 years, whilst the other used renting to maximize their income and still live here in the UK, London, North Wheezy to be exact. Two sides, two approaches. None righter, none wronger. Just two different approaches. Both sides of the family full of phenomenal Windrush descendants. Phenomenal people. I mean, I love them dearly. Both sides have played an infinitely important part in my life. So really, there's no shade, no shame to either approach. Just two different approaches to the same problem. How do we find stability for ourselves and our family for the now and for the future in this foreign land? My parents and I have both rented and owned here in the UK. As adults, my wife and I have both rented and owned here in the UK. My kids have both lived in rented and owned accommodation. Whichever camp you are from, I get it. I've seen the good, the bad, and the downright ugly of both scenarios. So whichever side you are on, please know this podcast is still for you. So let's be honest, in our culture, just like going to university, ownership is often held as the gold standard, and I ain't mad at that. But one thing I am mad at is when we talk about the decision of what is best for you and your family, what is often left out of the conversation is the true cost of ownership and what ownership really means. In the legal sense, owning a property is possessing a piece of paper known as the title or deed, which says, "Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. I do declare that this property and this piece of land between these boundaries belong to this or these people or entities named herein." Cool. But what they don't always tell you, not at the beginning anyway, is that ownership also comes with responsibilities. Beyond just paying for the property and raising the deposit, you're also responsible for maintaining it, for paying taxes that are due on it, for ensuring it complies with local laws, and on and on and on. This is where the dream of home ownership can start to feel like a burden for many people. Whilst a lot of energy is given to affording the house, i.e. raising the deposit, often there is not much spoken regarding the importance of an emergency fund or accounting for maintenance costs. On top of that, if you've paid for the house with a loan, known as a mortgage, which is what most people do, not much conversation is given to what percentage of your salary should be going into your monthly payments. Often those mortgage payments are big, they're often chunky, and they're a large portion of your salary. For many people, this has led to years of struggling to make payments with the ever-looming threat of losing their home. This is the real cost of ownership that not many people talk about. So for those of you who are not yet in a position to buy but are considering buying, please understand all of this. So my grandparents, back to the two that returned to the Jamaica. They sold the properties that they owned all around northwest London that they had accrued over the 15 years that they were in this country, took the money and reinvested it in Jamaica. Although both of those grandparents died quite a few years ago, the family home in Jamaica that they built is still there. I took my kids there for their first visit just this summer gone. It was epic. We ran our hands across the cold iron grills that surround the property. We scoured the wind-blown mango tree planted by my windrush grandparents. We walked on the actual land that our grandparents once tread. It was epic. The immense, and I mean the overwhelming feeling of pride I felt to see a monument of what my grandparents did, for my children to see what their great-grandparents did. I mean, this has left an indelible mark on all of us forever. It's humbling and empowering. And whilst the property is in need of some major repairs, with what I've learned over the last 5 to 10 years, I'm in a real position to be able to help. The feeling I felt, the feeling I feel, is what I desire for you, beloved. I slipped into pastor mode there. That's why my business and this podcast is more than property management. It's about legacy. It's about that feeling. It's about helping you and your parents and grandparents and children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren profit from the properties that you own, properties that your family own, or properties you are about to inherit, so you can build generational wealth and secure a lasting legacy. You see, the conversations I'm having with some of my landlords is the conversation I'm going to start right here, right now. The right time to start preparing for the handing down of a property is now. Inheriting a house from a parent or grandparent can be meaningful, but it can also be a complex process. Even if your family have decided to sell the property and share the proceeds, this needs to be planned for carefully. Here are 10 quick steps that I want you to start thinking about right now. This will help you to prepare for inheriting the property. Step 1. Begin to research wills and estate planning. You need to ensure that the property is clearly included in your parent or grandparent's will or estate plan. You need to verify who the named beneficiaries are and whether the property will be inherited solely or to more than one person. Step 2, you need to familiarize yourself with inheritance laws. Research inheritance tax. You really need to start to consult a tax advisor to understand the obligations and your obligations should you inherit this property. Step 3, is there any debts or mortgages against that property? Is there anything left to be paid? You need to be prepared for this to know if you can even afford to make the mortgage payments that are going to be left, or whether you want to pay it off or refinance, whatever. You need to find out if there is any debt left on the property. Step 4. This one's a tricky one. We all know this one because we've heard the horror stories, right? If the property is being inherited jointly, you need to discuss the plans with the other beneficiaries. Like, are you going to sell the property? Are you renting the property? Does someone want to live in the property? Like, what's going on? These conversations need to be had. You might even want to consider getting a legal agreement in place to avoid unnecessary disputes. Get professional legal advice. Do it now. Step 5, you need to plan for the ongoing maintenance costs. Remember, ownership is also about maintenance. If you own your own home already, this isn't news to you. Start to put together a little budget, just as a little experiment for yourself. What is the budget that you would need to maintain this property? Step 6, you need to look at insurance coverage. Is the property insured? Does it have the necessary insurance? Is the insurance going to cover during the transition period as the property changes hands? If unoccupied, is the insurance company aware of that? You need to check this because having the wrong type of insurance for the property may mean that when you think you're covered, you're not really covered. Step 7, this is a big one. You can do this right now. Just consider your own financial situation. Can you afford to keep the house long term if you're the sole beneficiary? Or even if there's a few of you, can you afford to maintain the property? Can you manage the maintenance costs, the taxes, the potential mortgage payments? If not, you really need to look at the feasibility of selling or renting the property for additional income. Step 8, get a property valuation. Get a professional valuation to actually determine the real current market value. This will help you to calculate what the inheritance tax might be, if any, and also so you can make informed decisions about whether you're keeping or selling it. Step 9, please, this undergirds everything that we're looking at. Consult a legal and financial advisor. Seek professional advice now. This can help you navigate the probate process, maybe even help you minimize inheritance tax. This will help you to understand your legal responsibilities as the new property owner. This is very, very, very important. Underline this. If you're taking notes, write it in bold. Consult a legal advisor. Step 10, plan for probate. Be prepared for the probate process, which can take several months to over a year. This is the legal process that kicks in once your relative has passed. You need to think about, where are all the documents? Are the wills, the property deeds, do you have them to hand? Do you know where they are? Do you have proof of identity for all the beneficiaries? You're going to need to work closely with the executor of the estate, or even hire a solicitor to make sure this process is as smooth as possible. And look, underpinning all of this, and this is the reality of it, you need to discuss the plans with the family. Open communication can help avoid misunderstandings, making sure everyone knows what's going on and expectations are aligned. Really talk about long-term plans. Really talk about living arrangements. Really talk about if we're selling, if we're renting. Like, what are we doing here? We need to talk about it now, prepare for it now. Now listen, me I'm not idiot. I'm fully aware that these conversations are laced with traps. So-and-so saying that you're just after mummy and daddy things. You're like, you're wishing deadpan me already? I get it. There's this fear that if we talk about the inevitable, it's almost like we're bringing it on. But that's not true. We just have to prepare so that we can succeed and know what we're doing. We can't just leave it and see. This logic has not and is not working for our community. We've seen it before. We've heard it through the grapevine. We've seen how this area can lead to damage and family rifts that last a long time. So you listening to this right now, you may just have to be the one to be brave enough to have these conversations, to start these conversations. Someone has to have the intestinal fortitude to head straight into the storm for the good of the family and for the good of our community. I'll be real with you. By preparing in advance, you can make the process smoother and preserve the legacy of your loved one. 10 steps, and I know it was a whistle-stop tour, but the reality is what you need to learn from those steps, what you need to do, take those steps, be brave. And I understand that's a whole lot of information to take in. Pause. but take it in you must. Unpause. Ignorance is no defense. You need to take action now. And listen, if I could be so bold, after you've spoken with the family, after you've made a plan, here's my ask. If you as a family decide to sell, I am begging you, sell to someone in our community. I'm going to say that again. If you as a family decide to sell the family property, I am begging, sell to someone in our community. If you decide to keep the property as a rental, and if you're not going to self-manage it, I'm asking you that you use my property company. Yeah, I said it. Use my company. But if you don't use my company, use a company from our community. A company like mine. No, but for real, this is a real opportunity for the next generation of Windrush descendants to change the game forever. But we must stick together. Let's do it together. After the break, I'm going to give you my final thought. And this is where it's going to get a little bit more metaphysical, a little bit spiritual. We're going to take a look at the idea of ownership in a wider lens, like a more philosophical and ideological perspective. So if you want to go deep, stick around. But if you have things to do and you were here for the practical information, I ain't going to hold you. I'll see you on the next episode. But for those of you who want to go deeper, a little bit more woo-woo, a little bit more existential, grab a shovel. I'll see you after this quick little break. Guys, thank you so much for listening to the episode so far. It's me, Luke, obviously. Just a quick one to say this episode is sponsored by me. So listen, if you want any help with your property, if you want any advice, shoot me an email, luke@lukewhyte.com. That's luke@lukewhyte.com. We can get it cracking. And that's about it, really. On with the show. Peace. Yes, family, you stuck around. Perfect. So listen up. If owning something means to take responsibility for it, does that mean that we really, truly own it? Or does it own us? This ain't my question. This is a question that many people have discussed and thought about before. But can you even claim ownership of something as vast and timeless as land? Something that was here before you and something that will be here after you? I was speaking to my brethren the other day, and he was talking about the fact that there are some indigenous cultures that see land not as something to be owned, but as something to be cared for. Like they view themselves as stewards of the earth, not people who can own it. They think that there's a responsibility to protect and nurture it for future generations, but they don't ever see it as ownership in like the possessive sense, but more of a relationship. There's a relationship between us and land. There's a relationship between us and property and things that we own. Spiritual traditions have echoed this perspective in different ways. In Buddhism, for example, there's the teaching of impermanence, this idea that nothing lasts forever. And it goes as far as to purport that clinging to possessions only creates suffering. The same is true in Theism, which teaches us to flow with life rather than holding on to things. From this perspective, owning property or anything really is temporary. we don't own the land, we borrow it for a while. I think this type of thinking can help us as we think about passing on anything. In this sense, owning something is a call to stewardship. It's a call to take care of something, not just for our benefit, but for the benefit of others and for the future. So you don't own so much the thing, you own the responsibility to take care of the thing. And failure to take care of the thing is poor ownership. In the Christian tradition, in the Holy Book, the Bible, the first verses of the first page of the first chapter begins with a beautiful poem, a poem which is centered around an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-seeing being who out of his very nature decides to create. He creates a planet, he creates everything in and on that planet. Like a master painter with broad, beautiful strokes, he paints the most beautiful, majestic hues and calls it blues, the deepest of richest aesthetics, and calls it forests. Then from there, bends down into the created ground and makes from it a man, and he gives man, he breathes into man the breath of life. Then he gives this man ownership, dominion over all the fowls of the air, all the animals on the ground, all the trees, all the plants, everything he has created, he gives man dominion over. He gives him ownership of. He gives him stewardship of. In fact, the very breath, according to the Holy Book, the very breath that we breathe in and out is really only owned by us for a time. And our actions demonstrate a stewardship of that which we have been given. So in the truest sense, like, do we even own our lives? Or have we been given life to steward? And to steward those things that we are given as we live. In conclusion, what does it mean to own property? On the practical side, it means taking responsibility, financial risks, and legal rights. But on a deeper level, ownership is never permanent. What matters most isn't what we own, but how we care for it and what we leave behind. So if you're a descendant of the Windrush generation right now, go and grab your mum, your dad, your grandma, your grandparents, granduncles, great uncles. Pull them over here for a minute. Let me tell them something. For the Windrush generation, you've done well. You've stewarded what you had. You have taken care of what you were given, of what you worked for. And now it's time to think about the next generation and to pass it on. It's time for us, the next generation, it's time for us to take care of what you have taken care of for so long. Not simply to enjoy the fruit of your work, but also to steward it so that the next generation can benefit from our good stewardship. This is generational wealth. This is legacy. taking care of what you have so that those after you can take care of what you have, so that those after you can take care of what you have. This is legacy. As we wrap up this episode 1 of Property Purpose People, I invite you, I implore you to reflect on your relationship with ownership. What might change if you viewed ownership as a responsibility to take care of that which you have, until someone else can take care of that which you gave them? There's a saying that I love. It's one of my favorites. For a wise man builds a tree, under its shade he will never sit. Thank you for joining me on this exploration. On the next episode, we'll tackle, well, tune in to find out. Until then, take a moment to appreciate what you have. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next episode. Peace.